Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm your host, James Wisdom, and this is Drawing for Tattooers on Guy Atchison's Reinventing the Tattoo Network. Hey, good morning, Tattoo Now. Hey, well, um, I'm just going to focus on warm ups today. That's going to be the whole theme of today. I am just starting off by making some points, connecting point to point. Get rid of this. Again, we're just warming up. We're just thinking about getting the blood pumping. So, where to begin, right? I suppose that you could think about your warm ups as either free association, or you can also think about them in terms of like a composition. Like you could, for instance, with this exercise, you could place several points at different intervals, and you could decide how you go about connecting the dots, as it were. Um, right. So one of the first exercises that I really wanted to work on this morning, drawing some clouds. Uh, for me, I draw clouds quite a bit as backgrounds, but sometimes they're nice as really kind of a focal point. They could become a big part of the focus. Lots of different ways to go about it. I guess I'm thinking about these as bubbles. I'm looking for variety though. What I what I want to avoid is having everything sort of in the same, like line up at the same place, right? So all these peaks, all of these, I'm not going to necessarily draw this grid in, but I'm going to think about it. I'm going to think about how some of these alignments um, are relating to one another, right? I think if you do have the same, everything is the same, it does get a bit monotonous. So having a little bit of variety, I think it's worth working on. So yeah, just kind of warm up on it. As I'm developing some of the larger shapes in here, get into some general to specific, right? Try to work from the these really large areas to the more specific ones. And again, just thinking about warming up, just thinking about moving my eyes around the composition. You might, for instance, compose it, right? That was a little bit more of a free association, but I might compose the where I want these cloud shapes to live. So maybe have a bit of a parameter for yourself, right? And just try to build them up. Do the same on this side. And really have fun with it. Um, Again, you may sort of think about this in terms of like atmospheric perspective and build a whole set of smaller forms off into the distance. And again, we're working digitally today, but if you're working on paper, you could always throw a piece of tracing paper over this and draw much lighter, right? Just don't worry about line quality, about too many details at this stage. Instead, just get the ideas out, and you can always refine it, make it more detailed later on. And before you know it, I do believe you're really starting to get a nice frame, right? Something that will something that can hold the viewer's eye, and maybe even focus them to a particular point. This can be useful for all different kinds of applications. Another cloud form to maybe think about is some swirls, right? Some swirly clouds. So again, maybe just kind of starting off with that really rough bubble shape. Maybe we add just a bit of a swirl in there. Maybe some of those bubble shapes are making their way. Again, same sort of principle. I would try to have a little bit of variety here, and again, visually you can inspect and see. You don't want too many things to align, but that will cause you to have some rhythm. Right? If you, as long as you kind of build in a little bit of contrast. Remember, contrast is about difference. So again, thinking about this in terms of a free association. Yeah, thanks. Yes. Dwellers are all great, painting clouds on my wall with expired tattoo ink. Amazing. Yeah. Well, you got to do something with that expired ink, right? You don't want to just don't tattoo with it, right? So again, just sort of thinking about just how can we add some more movement, something more dynamic. Again, it'd be good to again add variety. Don't have everything just the same. But at this initial stage, you're just composing it. Um, well, I guess like I was saying, you're kind of free associating whatever you're feeling like, right? However you're moving your hand around, and what happens is what is after this, you could really compose it a bit more. You could add a little bit, balance it out, and then again make a very much tighter drawing, um, if you wish. You know, lower down the opacity, for example. Really try to make it as refined as you can. And again, I think you really will have a lot of uses for this sort of thing. Even if you're not drawing clouds, you really could practice drawing waves. Um, there was actually a really great How to Draw Waves by Andre Malcolm. He did a live guest lecture on Reinventing the Tattoo, and so I put that QR code up here. Definitely check it out. It's really in depth, kind of how to draw Japanese style waves, which is not necessarily this, but what I'm suggesting is that perhaps there's something to just getting warmed up, and then if you really start to you want to refine it, or you want to compose waves in these forms. Again, Andre Malcolm has like some really great insights into how you can um, really achieve that aesthetic. So I'm gonna get don't get too finicky about it. But yes, this sort of thing, this kind of movement, we're thinking about, um, again, warming up, some flow, some contrast. Uh, I think what you could think about as well is a little bit of line quality. Um, you may have some areas where having a thinner line included could actually add just a lot of really interesting details. But again, I wouldn't say just go for these details first, right? General to specific. So you do these really general shapes, and then you can work on adding more of these intricate areas. Very good. But giving the whole thing a pass, right? Going over the whole thing in stages, trusting the process, as it were. All right. Switch up my pencils here. So another warm up that I like to do, like to think about, is drawing flames, drawing fire. Hey, good morning, Jason Leeser. Great to hear from you. When I'm drawing fire, for instance, right, there's a few ways you can go about it. You can make it really stylized. You can try to do it naturalistic. Again, if you're thinking about clouds too, for that matter, we were making ours really stylized. You can, of course, same kind of thing, but seems like a more naturalistic kind of approach. You could achieve a lot of the same kind of results, I suppose. And there's all different kinds of clouds, right? The cumulus clouds, the cirrus ones, whatever. I like these, these real structural, kind of billowy ones. But again, you can, it doesn't have to be that really rigid, and it can be. I mean, that can be really beautiful too. I think if again, it's a repetition, it's a rhythm, it's probably a consistency that you would carry throughout. But our focus today is really on just getting warmed up and thinking about, like, how do we get into the mood, right? How do we get to the mood to draw? After you have some composition, right, you can always go through and you can just block in some rendering. Doesn't have to be really detailed. Again, sort of getting your arm moving, getting your head in the game, thinking about, like, what would be the tonal value structure, right? What would be the rhythm of light and dark as you're starting to compose this scene. And something that Jake Meeks talks about is kind of anchoring the composition, anchoring, like, your darks. So for instance, maybe you have like a frame, really dark, sort of clouds. Again, blocking this in. There's no reason to get too obsessive about it, but just giving yourself, like, this is going to be the tone. And all of a sudden, the line that you have becomes a shape, right? You've made this line, and now it's starting to become a shape. And just smudge it, so for the sake of brevity. Yeah, so right, so blocking in, and now before you know it, right, you've kind of established, like, well, this is the foreground, right? I've got a middle ground, so on and so forth. You may end up adding a few more layers, so on and so forth, but it would be before you got really, really sharp with all the details about the highlights and the cast shadows and all that, thinking about the overall, what would be the local value, right? What would be the value of this really extreme foreground cloud, right? What would be the value of the ones, like, deep in the background? So just sort of developing a bit of a tone plan for it. That'll help your details really sing, right? You can, after you have a few more details in here, right, or a few more of the layers kind of mapped out, then yeah, then you could start to add a bit more detail, and it starts to become very interesting real quickly. But again, we're just warming up. We're not getting too deep into that. Cool. All right, now fire. Now thinking about fire. So right, again, naturalistic versus more stylized. I do really think about this sort of this S shape, and you might sort of just plot a couple of points for yourself if that helps. Elegant curves, for instance. Um, right. What is the shape that you're going to want? I would also, again, same kind of thought. Just watch out for the alignments, right? So that way you have a little bit of variety. Where do all the tips kind of where do they end, as it were? Mhm. Again, just keeping it loose, thinking about a shape. All the lines that I'm making eventually coming together and producing a shape, right? The shape of this fire. But just keeping it loose, right? Maybe there's a couple of layers. Um, some of these little portions of the flames, right? It feels like it can in this instance, like you can kind of have it a little bit thinner here, right? Goes from thick to thin in various places, right? Maybe there's like a gap in it. If you really like this kind of approach, right, you could of course give yourself a window and make a few thumbnails, right? That'll be another warm up I'm talking about. Um, but again, you know, try to make it kind of naturalistic. You're going to want a lot of variation. If you want it more stylized, right? I think again, same kind of principle, right? You just want to you might also give yourself a bit of a shape too. You know what I mean? That might help if you really want to conform it. But again, we're warming up, right? You could think about this in terms of free association. Where does this lead me, or how do I want to fit a space? I think there's not really a right answer here. It's just really, it's your warm up. So do what uh, do what you want to do. You could also liquefy this a bit, right? Grab that tool, liquefy tool. I could select it. I believe I can do this. Isolate that, yeah. Change the shape a bit, something like that. Um, get it roughed in. Now I could really make a something much more with much sharper, more consistent lines if I want. But having a little bit of a rough draft. Um, Again, through that free association, you do that. Now you have something really interesting. Or start with a particular shape in mind, but we're moving from these again, like there's a point, right? Kind of target practice from point to point, make a line, right? Eventually there's a shape that starts to emerge out of it, right? So at some point You may start drawing with like a larger brush, right? And um, so you're, in a sense, you could be making these shapes. Well, whatever, make a shape out of it. Um, Start painting with more of a shape from the get-go. Maybe you find that faster. Maybe it works better for you. Um, but then, yeah, you could take it. You could take this in any direction. You could start to render, right? You could also move into outlines, something like that. So again, just this warming up process. Maybe you find that working with line, I will work with lines quite a bit. I will, of course, work more shape based, right, with a bigger brush, and move through things that way. Um, I think changing it up, I find it helpful. I find that it keeps it interesting. Um, right. So once you've really started to think about, just these were organic sort of shapes that I was making, and just trying to make the movements of my arm, pretty intuitive. Another really great warm up that you can think about is warming up with forms, thinking about different forms that you could sketch. This will require you to think about perspective a little bit. So doing some really basic perspective exercises really informs like how you can sort of think this. But again, this may be pretty basic, and maybe you did it already done this. Well, um, you might find that it's just sort of useful. It's like there for you. So you think about like a cube shape, for instance. Um, all right. Next maybe I think about like another cube. Let's see. Try to change the perspective a little bit. Make it dynamic. Really, you're thinking about the edges. Like when you're trying to draw a form like this, right? You really want these parallel edges, right? You want them to appear like they're gonna go off into they're gonna meet at a point somewhere off in the distance. But again, we're just imagining that, or eyeballing it, as it were. So, all right, draw a cube. Fun, yeah, super fun. Put a little light source on it, right? Think about the light source. So, what would happen, right? We could pretend that that's touching, right? That corner's touching. Um, Sort of block in some of the simple values, right? This side is away from the light source, so sort of block that in. That's nice. I might not go all the way to just, flat, solid dark on these planes. I might think about again some reserve. So reserving some of that really dark stuff for something else. Um, like a cast shadow, right? Maybe there's a bit of a shadow underneath this edge. This block is resting right on the corner of itself. Really dark, casting a shadow. Maybe like a similar situation here, right? With this block. Right. At some point, also have the shape of this block here, right, in the shadow. So all of that shadow shape kind of represents the casted shadow. I might go with a slightly sharper dark, right? As we're close to the form. And then maybe diffuse it a little bit. Again, I do think that we are warming up, of course, but some having some of the principles in mind, I think is also I think it makes the warm up more exciting. But essentially, we may have you know two different types of shadows. One is the form shadow, which is this, right? These are the form. They're being rendered by shadow, and then the casted shadow, right? Those are pretty much the two different types of shadows that you're going to have. You generally, I think about the edges of the shadows as being somewhat indicative, right? So with a form shadow, usually there's some kind of it's diffused, or it's softer. Um, think about like a sphere, for example. There's a line of where the light doesn't reach anymore, right? So it's called the terminator, or the core shadow. And then everything underneath is really rendered, right? But this shadow here that I'm sketching, right, this is the form shadow. The shadow that it would cast, right, is cast shadow. Again, like the edges are like a little sharper, right? Now, I don't think I think if you just keep this in mind, it may be a really game of just really subtle sorts of uh, moves that you might make. And so um, as the shadow gets further away, right, it's still a cast shadow, but it's slightly more diffused, it's slightly softer. Um, whereas like the most intense part of the cast shadow is really sharp, and I think that helps to indicate for the viewer like what it is they're looking at. But really, this is just a way to warm up, right? Just a way to start to think about like how you like if you get really quick at sort of blocking in these objects, right? Cylinder to, again, you could put a sphere underneath it, or some kind of a rectangle prism, right? You start thinking about like how you can get these forms to start looking like they're all in the same sort of space, right? They have three dimensions and they have perspective and stuff. That's going to help you, I think, visualize as you're starting to make. Again, go back to those really organic shapes, right? So we're thinking about like maybe there's like a tree or something. Make that a little less. Maybe you want to sketch a tree shape or whatever. And again, there might be a lot of intuition there, right? As far as what really works for you, what looks real good to you, being organic and the like. But with trees, I know what we were talking about with these really naturalistic flames, like we were able to go from like sort of have it get thicker and then thinner and so on and so forth. With trees, generally, you can work from thick to thin, for example. So having a little bit of thought about the context of what you're making. Yeah. That can help you. But again, just roughing it in, thinking about just having fun. There's going to be all kinds of assignments throughout the day. You have to do this and you have to do that. But I give myself this assignment, and it does, I want to have fun with it. Just like I was sort of mentioning, right? You want to like sort of make sure that you have this perspective in check, right? These two edges that are parallel going back to a single point. Take a step back and look at your tree shape and make sure that you're going from larger, right, to thinner. And so in my case, I might end up like, kind of making it even wider. So I have just a little bit more room to build. And I won't worry about those really small branches, but okay. So that's a tree shape, right? Well, lower it down, right? Again, I can start to think about this in terms of its shape and perspective, right? So again, this form, right? There's something that goes across this contour. Maybe there's an intersection here. And it's moving through space. And even if you did this very lightly, you might very well sort of find that it helps you when you go to render it. So it kind of gives us the sense like this, this tree is moving back into the background, as it were. All right. Might even make that just a little bit lighter, add another layer, right? Why not? And then think about, like, again, can look to this example, right? Or these examples here. Give ourselves a little bit of render, right? There's a sort of edge where the light no longer reaches this tree branch. Again, we may end up having the whole thing might be sort of blocked in, right? But having some notes of dark, especially like the extreme light and dark, can be very appealing. Maybe again, so rendering the planes of this branch, casting a shadow, right, over itself. Yeah, like that sort of a thing. There we go. Right, and then so on and so forth. I mean, you're warming up, right? You're doing these simple exercises, so that way you really are, I think, just more in that. You're just more in that zone when you're going to do the thing that you're getting paid for, hypothetically. So, all right. Now that we've just sort of warmed up and we've got some really some fun shapes, some fun ideas circulating. Thumbnails, right? Thumbnail sketches. Something really good about thumbnail sketches, again, I think it's actually can be really enjoyable. I think if you can sort of get into the spirit and just make them for fun. You start to do this as a regular part of your practice for the actual designs that you need to make, and you might find that you're getting just a lot more out of it. So here we go. So with any thumbnail, I really like to I think about like a frame first, right? So we've started off thinking about lines and points and lines, and then a plane, right, or a shape. So we'll have a shape. And again, you can think about like a particular space of a tattoo that you want to fill in, or you can think about like a composition. Maybe you're working on a painting or some other type of illustration, and you have a parameter, like how big you want to go. If you're doing it on your own for fun, still imagine some sort of frame for yourself. Give yourself a little bit of parameter. And then in that, you can start to think about all different kinds of, what is it you'd like to do subject matter wise. It could be a free association like we've been talking about. um, but I like to draw like bio organic sort of landscapes. I think those are really fun. And I might just, start off with just a couple of lines to kind of give myself some interesting flow, some interesting composition. Again, you can look at images of nature and kind of get into the, some kind of rhythm that you like. But once you have sort of established some kind of shape that you like, again, just like we did with the clouds earlier, you can block it in and sort of think about what might be the what might be the relationship of the tones, right? Maybe these maybe these really extreme, again, foreground areas have a lot of value, right? Um, they're closest to us, so they may have the most contrast that's possible. Um, but we won't worry about getting any details. Well, through here, I could also kind of see, like, you know, putting in some more textures and ridges and things in the back. Again, might have like just another layer stuff, but I'm gonna break it up with a slightly different tone, right? To kind of produce a bit of atmospheric perspective, make a little bit of depth. Add a little bit of sharpness, right? Some edge to these forms. I didn't mean to erase that. It just happened, I swear. Um, yeah, and then I'm I'm digging it. I think that's kind of fun. Um, all right, there's one, right? Guess what? Time to draw another one, right? So you can. I just flipped it around just to kind of get a view of what that would look like. Again, we can get really sort of entranced by the image that we're making. Um, so you break the spell, right? You flip your composition around. Maybe you look at it in a mirror, whatever. Okay. Maybe with this in this case, I'll start with like some kind of enigmatic like cube shape like we had before, right? We were kind of drawing those little 3-point perspective cube. A little bit rough. Okay, whatever. We're sketching. All right, then maybe there's the same kind of the same kind of vibe, right? Like there's something that exists. This cube is in space, kind of floating around, and maybe this is in front of it, right? It's above, but in front, light sources coming from this direction, right? And it's casting a shadow on this cube. Otherwise, it's pretty illuminated. Not too many details, but just kind of getting everything roughed in. Same thing back here, just really light, really light. Push it to the back. Make this edge a little bit more pronounced, right? The edges of this block. Maybe, again, maybe we can see a little bit of this block sort of shadow back here on this form. Just guessing, right, where that stuff will be. Sometimes that's good enough, right? Like that's what it's called in perspective when you just eyeball it, like you're eyeballing it, because it's approximate, right? It looks pretty good. All right, so yeah, that's kind of cool. But I don't care. I'm just I'm getting warmed up, trying to have fun, and thinking about all the different ways I can sort of make space, right? Drawings are about space, really. Um, like if we tell a story, right, that's a narrative, right? Drawings aren't really ever narrative. They're really about spatial relationship. So, um, yeah, seascapes. Definitely seascape, or you know, some kind of sci-fi planet, something like that, right? Just it feels very feels otherworldly. But sometimes we get that on this one, right? Feels otherworldly, but it's also something familiar as well, which is interesting. All right, just trying to close it here. Yeah, I don't know. I'll zoom in a little bit so kind of feel it. Again, I'm keeping these kind of small, right? It's really just about as big as my wrist, so I can end up. It's my hand, right? Um, that's the way I understand. Like when we talk that way, right? It's in the artist's hand. Um, it's within the jurisdiction of what your hand wants to make, if you like. Um, Again, you can take that whatever is your hand and it has a personality, right? You can take it, start to size it up, make something much bigger, make a big tattoo design, whatever the case may be. um, Kind of looks like a donut, space donut. um, Again, I think you could do this very much like as a free association exercise, or again, you can compose it, you know, just over on the side. You start to think about, oh, I want to have little spikes coming off of this, and oh, I think I'd rather have like something a little bit more square. Maybe I would have something that's more like sort of hook, whatever you want. But again, you can make these little notes to yourself, and then start to realize it, thinking about things in terms of its dimensional quality, and then next composing it, right, and giving yourself something, giving yourself something to work with. I don't know where this one's going. I don't know. But yeah, just keep doing them, right? Just keep doing your thumbnail sketches. Keep doing all these other little exercises. That's pretty much it today. This was a exploration of various ways that you can, you know, use your time to get warmed up. So I like to warm up with all different kinds of ways. If you watch this drawing stream, oftentimes I will just start off with very basic like ellipses, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. You could make it more practical and turn them into shapes if you wish. sometimes I don't know what to draw. And so I'll just revert to having something. And so practicing ellipses, practicing just those basic shapes, squares and triangles and stuff. It just gets your hand moving. It just starts to get your eyes working and interested. Uh, so how do you, kind of maintain a drawing practice? I think it has to be challenging and it has to be fun. So moving through some of these little exercises, you know, take a little bit from this encounter, right? From what we've talked about. Go watch another content creator and see what they're talking about. Um, I think ultimately the best thing that you can do is sort of realize your own freedom, right? That you have this permission and this freedom to make stuff, make the things that you want to see. And so get warmed up, right? And you never know, you might end up with a few really good thumbnails or, some really good sort of doodles that could make for an incredible piece. And you just never know until you make it. Well, I want to thank you for coming to the drawing stream today. It has been my pleasure to do it. Would like to thank Gabe Ripley from Tattoo Now. Tattoo Now is technology for tattooers. So check out Tattoo Now. You can see what they have to offer. Some really great customer relations management software. And Gabe is very knowledgeable, so ask for him. We'd also like to thank Guy Atchison for being the founder and inspiration behind the Reinventing the Tattoo community. Thanks, Guy. We really appreciate the space and getting a chance to get together every week at the subscribers drawing group is a real highlight. I think it's really good for my own drawing practice. So if you're watching this still, I would certainly encourage you to click that QR code that I have on the screen and you can learn more about Reinventing the Tattoo. I'm James Wisdom. This has been Drawing for Tattooers. You can find me on the internet at Tattoo and Wisdom. Happy drawing, everybody, and we will see you next